the Battle of Cannae. On August 2nd, 216 BCE, the fields near Cannae in southern Italy became the stage for one of history's greatest military maneuvers. Hannibal Barca of Carthage faced a Roman army of nearly 86,000 men, almost twice the size of his own force of about 50,000. Rather than meeting Rome's legions head-on, Hannibal set a deadly trap. He arranged his infantry in a crescent, deliberately placing his weaker troops at the center. As the Romans surged forward, they pressed the Carthaginian line inward, believing victory was within reach. But as they advanced deeper, Hannibal's African infantry on the flanks wheeled inward, while his cavalry, having crushed the Roman horsemen, struck from behind. The Roman army was surrounded on all sides in a perfect double envelopment. By day's end, nearly 50,000 Roman soldiers lay dead, with thousands more captured, one of the bloodiest defeats in Roman history. The Battle of Cannae remains a timeless lesson in strategy, studied in military academies to this day, and a testament to Hannibal's unmatched genius on the battlefield. Alexander at Gaugamela. On October 1st, 331 BCE, on the plains near Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq, Alexander the Great faced King Darius III of Persia. The Macedonian army stood at around 47,000 men, while Darius commanded well over 100,000, supported by war elephants and scythed chariots. Outnumbered more than 2-1, Alexander relied on precision rather than numbers. He advanced his right wing diagonally, deliberately exposing it to draw the Persian cavalry outward. His men feigned retreat, pulling the enemy further from the center. At that critical moment, Alexander led his elite companion cavalry in a wedge formation straight through the gap in the Persian lines. Their charge was aimed directly at Darius. Confronted with the sudden strike and fearing capture, the Persian king abandoned the battlefield, leaving his army leaderless. The result was decisive. Despite overwhelming odds, Alexander's tactical brilliance shattered Persian power in a single day. The victory at Gaugamela not only gave him control of Mesopotamia, but also marked the collapse of the Achaemenid Empire, cementing his place as one of history's greatest military commanders. Battle of Agincourt. October 25th, 1415, northern France. On the muddy fields near Agincourt, King Henry V of England stood against a French force nearly 3 times his size. His men were exhausted from weeks of marching, but Henry turned weakness into strategy. He chose a narrow, freshly plowed field, hemmed in by woods that would choke the massive French army into a bottleneck. Behind sharpened wooden stakes, English longbowmen prepared their bows. When the armored French cavalry advanced, they sank into the heavy mud, their movement slowed to a crawl. Then came the storm, tens of thousands of arrows raining down, piercing armor, cutting down knights and horses alike. Crushed together, French soldiers trampled and suffocated one another. When the English archers ran out of arrows, they waded into the chaos with axes, swords, and mallets. By the battle's end, the flower of French nobility lay dead or captured. Henry V's victory at Agincourt proved that discipline, terrain, and technology could shatter overwhelming numbers, and it enshrined the English longbow as one of the most decisive weapons of medieval warfare. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I'll greatly appreciate it if you could show support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Delaware River Crossing. On the night of December 25, 1776, the fate of the American Revolution seemed all but lost. General George Washington gathered his weary Continental Army and made a daring choice: to cross the ice-choked Delaware River under the cover of darkness. Through freezing winds and treacherous waters, thousands of soldiers pushed boats across, determined to strike when the enemy least expected it. By dawn on December 26th, Washington's men marched into Trenton, New Jersey, where over 1,000 Hessian soldiers lay unsuspecting after Christmas celebrations. In less than 2 hours, the Americans secured a stunning victory, capturing nearly the entire garrison while suffering only minimal losses. This bold stroke did more than win a battle. It reignited the revolution, restored faith in Washington's leadership, and proved that timing and audacity could turn desperation into triumph. Washington's crossing of the Delaware remains one of the most brilliant military maneuvers in history. The Battle of the Three Emperors. December 2, 1805, on the fields near Austerlitz in Moravia, Napoleon Bonaparte faced the combined armies of Tsar Alexander I of Russia and Emperor Francis II of Austria. Outnumbered, but not outmatched, Napoleon devised a plan of deception. He deliberately abandoned the high ground of the Pratzen Heights and weakened his right flank, making it appear vulnerable. The Allies took the bait, pouring their forces into the apparent gap. At that moment, Napoleon unleashed Marshal Soult's corps in a sudden assault on the center, driving through the Allied line and cutting their army in two. Davout's corps, after a forced march, held firm on the threatened French right, ensuring the trap was complete. By the end of the day, the Allies had lost nearly 30,000 men, compared to about 9,000 French casualties. The Battle of the Three Emperors became Napoleon's masterpiece, ending the Third Coalition and forcing Austria to sign the Treaty of Pressburg, reshaping Europe and cementing his reputation as one of history's greatest strategists. Operation Overlord. On June 6, 1944, in Normandy, France, the Allied invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe, known as Operation Overlord, was not just the largest amphibious assault in history, it was also one of the most brilliant acts of deception ever carried out. In the months leading up to D-Day, the Allies launched Operation Fortitude, a plan designed to convince Hitler that the real invasion would strike at Pas-de-Calais. Inflatable Sherman tanks, wooden aircraft, dummy landing craft, and entire Phantom divisions, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, were positioned across the English coast. Fake radio traffic buzzed with invented orders, while double agents, like Juan Pujol Garcia, fed German intelligence carefully crafted lies. The ruse worked. Even as 156,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, Hitler kept his powerful 15th Army stationed at Calais, waiting for an attack that never came. That delay allowed the Allies to establish a vital beachhead, push inland, and begin the liberation of France. Operation Overlord proved that deception, as much as strength, could decide the fate of a continent. Mongol feigned retreats. In the early 13th century, the Mongol Empire, under Genghis Khan, rose from the steppes of Central Asia to dominate much of Eurasia. Their conquests were not built on sheer numbers, but on strategy, and none was more feared than the feigned retreat. In battle, Mongol horsemen would clash with the enemy, then appear to panic and scatter in flight. Overconfident foes, convinced they had broken the Mongols, pursued recklessly, only to be led into a trap. At the signal, hidden cavalry units swept in from the flanks, surrounding and destroying their exhausted pursuers. This tactic was used with devastating effect from China to Eastern Europe. At the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223, Mongol forces lured the Rus and their allies into a long pursuit before encircling and annihilating them, killing tens of thousands. It was a masterclass in deception, discipline, and psychological warfare. The Mongol feigned retreat shattered armies many times their size and left a legacy still studied in military strategy today. Empty fort strategy. In 228 AD, during the turbulent Three Kingdoms era of China, strategist Zhuge Liang faced disaster after the loss at Jieting left his forces scattered and the city of Sicheng vulnerable. With only a handful of soldiers and no time to defend, Zhuge Liang turned to deception. He ordered the city gates thrown wide open, placed a few men in plain sight sweeping the streets, and calmly sat atop the walls playing his guqin. To his approaching enemy, General Sima Yi, the scene was unnerving. An undefended city, presented so openly, could only mean a deadly ambush awaited inside. Unwilling to risk it, Sima Yi ordered a retreat, sparing Zhuge Liang from certain defeat. This maneuver, later remembered as the empty fort strategy, transformed weakness into strength and became one of the legendary 36 stratagems. Though romanticized in the romance of the Three Kingdoms, its lesson endured for centuries. In war, perception can be more powerful than numbers, and sometimes the boldest defense is to appear defenseless. The Siege of Tenochtitlan. In May 1521, Hernán Cortés began the final assault on the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. For nearly 3 months, the Spanish and their indigenous allies, most crucially the Tlaxcalans, pressed the siege against a city once considered unconquerable. Cortés's strategy was ruthless and calculated. He built a fleet of brigantines to dominate Lake Texcoco, cutting off supplies and escape routes, while Allied forces attacked along the causeways. The city's aqueduct was destroyed, leaving its defenders without fresh water. Inside Tenochtitlan, hunger and disease spread rapidly, weakening the once mighty Aztec resistance. On August 13, 1521, Emperor Cuauhtémoc was captured while attempting to flee across the lake, signaling the collapse of the Aztec Empire. The city was left in ruins, and on its foundations, the Spanish built Mexico City, marking the beginning of colonial rule in the Americas. The fall of Tenochtitlan was not just a military victory. It was a turning point that reshaped the history of an entire continent. The Battle of Zama. In 202 BC, on the plains of Zama in modern-day Tunisia, Rome and Carthage met for the final clash of the Second Punic War. Hannibal commanded an army of veteran soldiers and 80 war elephants, hoping to break the Roman lines. But opposite him stood Scipio Africanus, a commander who had studied Hannibal's tactics for years. As the elephants charged, Scipio gave a surprising order. His men opened wide lanes between their maniples, creating corridors for the beasts to thunder through harmlessly. Roman trumpeters blasted their horns, frightening the animals further, while light infantry skirmished and withdrew, drawing them into the empty channels. Many elephants panicked and trampled Hannibal's own troops. With the danger neutralized, Scipio unleashed his infantry advance, and his cavalry, led by Massinissa, struck the Carthaginian flanks. The result was decisive. Hannibal's army was crushed, Carthage was forced to surrender, and Rome emerged as the dominant power of the Mediterranean. The Battle of Zama was not only a victory of arms, but a triumph of strategy, turning Hannibal's greatest weapon into his undoing. The Battle of Hastings. October 14, 1066, on Senlac Hill near Hastings. The fate of England hung in the balance as King Harold II's Saxon army faced the Norman invaders, led by Duke William of Normandy. Harold's men formed a solid shield wall on the ridge, a near-impenetrable defense of disciplined infantry. Again and again, Norman archers, infantry, and cavalry hurled themselves forward, only to be beaten back. At one point, panic spread when a rumor claimed William had been killed, but he rode bareheaded through his lines, rallying his men to fight on. Then came the decisive move. William ordered his cavalry to feign retreat. Believing the Normans were fleeing, sections of Harold's army abandoned the ridge and gave chase. The moment they broke formation, Norman horsemen wheeled around, cutting them down and tearing gaps in the shield wall. With repeated feigned withdrawals, the English lines slowly crumbled. By nightfall, Harold lay dead. Tradition says an arrow struck him in the eye, and his army collapsed. William stood victorious, soon to be crowned King of England. The Norman conquest had begun, forever reshaping the language, culture, and destiny of a nation. Siege of Constantinople. On April 6, 1453, Constantinople, the last stronghold of the Byzantine Empire, faced the siege of Sultan Mehmed II, only 21 years old, yet commanding over 80,000 Ottoman troops. For weeks, the city's legendary Theodosian walls endured a relentless bombardment from massive cannons, including the giant basilica, engineered by Orban, that hurled stone balls weighing over half a ton. Still, the defenders held on. Then came Mehmed's boldest move. On the night of April 21st, he ordered dozens of ships hauled over greased logs across land and into the Golden Horn, bypassing the great chain that had protected the harbor for centuries. By late May, the city was encircled by land and sea, its defenses crumbling under constant assault. On May 29th, Ottoman forces stormed through a breach in the walls, overwhelming the exhausted defenders. The Byzantine Empire fell, and Constantinople became the new capital of the Ottoman Empire. The city's fall marked the end of the Middle Ages, the rise of Ottoman dominance, and a turning point that reshaped the course of world history. Battle of Midway. On June 4, 1942, just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the US and Japan clashed near Midway Atoll in a battle that would change the course of the Pacific War. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto aimed to lure out and destroy what remained of the American fleet, but US cryptographers had cracked Japan's naval code JN-25B, confirming Midway, codenamed AF, as the target. Armed with this knowledge, Admiral Chester Nimitz positioned his 3 carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and the hastily repaired Yorktown, north of Midway, hidden and waiting. At dawn, waves of Japanese aircraft struck the island, but as they regrouped, American carrier-based planes closed in. After repeated costly attempts, US dive bombers found their mark. In a span of minutes, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were set ablaze, with Hiryu destroyed later that day. By June 7th, all 4 Japanese carriers lay at the bottom of the Pacific. The outcome was decisive. Japan lost its veteran pilots and its offensive edge, while the United States seized the initiative. The Fabian Strategy. In 217 BCE, during the Second Punic War, Rome reeled from Hannibal's stunning victories. After the disaster at Lake Trasimene, the Senate turned to Quintus Fabius Maximus, appointing him dictator. But instead of seeking revenge in open battle, Fabius devised a strategy that defied Roman tradition. He refused direct confrontation with Hannibal's superior cavalry, choosing instead to shadow his movements, cut off supply lines, and scorch the earth to deny his army food and shelter. This war of attrition frustrated both Hannibal and the Roman public. Critics mocked him as cunctator, the delayer, for avoiding glory on the battlefield. Yet his patience prevented further catastrophic defeats and bought Rome precious time to rebuild. When later leaders abandoned his method at Cannae, the result was disaster. History vindicated Fabius. His strategy became a timeless lesson in restraint, proving that endurance and calculated delay can be just as powerful as decisive attack. Hitler's Blitzkrieg. September 1, 1939. Germany invaded Poland with a method of warfare the world had never seen before: Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This strategy fused fast-moving tank divisions, mechanized infantry, and devastating air power into one coordinated assault. The mastermind behind its tactics was General Heinz Guderian, whose vision of armored warfare reshaped the battlefield. In Poland, the German onslaught broke resistance in just weeks, shocking Europe. But the true demonstration came in the West. On May 10, 1940, German forces bypassed France's heavily fortified Maginot Line by pushing through the Ardennes, a region the Allies believed impassable. At Sedan, panzers smashed French lines, while dive bombers pounded defenses, creating panic and collapse. Within days, Allied armies were encircled, forcing the desperate evacuation at Dunkirk. By June 22, France had surrendered after only 6 weeks of fighting. Blitzkrieg proved that speed, surprise, and precision could topple entire nations. But its early success also emboldened Hitler, plunging Europe into a far longer and bloodier war. The Siege of Syracuse. In 415 BCE, at the height of the Peloponnesian War, Athens launched its Grand Sicilian Expedition, sending more than 130 ships and thousands of men to conquer Syracuse, the most powerful city in Sicily. The plan was to besiege the city and dominate the western Mediterranean, but in 414 BCE, everything changed. Syracuse found an unlikely ally in Sparta when General Gylippus arrived. Instead of staying behind the walls, he ordered counter-walls to block Athenian siege lines. Every advance Athens made was met with new Syracusan fortifications, draining Athenian strength and time. At sea, Gylippus reorganized Syracuse's navy. By fighting in the narrow harbors, Syracusan ships rammed and disabled Athenian triremes, stripping Athens of its naval supremacy. The climax came in 413 BCE. Syracuse, reinforced by Spartan and Corinthian ships, trapped the Athenian fleet in the Great Harbor. Athens tried to break out but was crushed in a massive naval battle. On land, their armies, led by Nicias and Demosthenes, attempted a desperate retreat, only to be surrounded. Thousands were slain near the river Asinaris, and the rest were captured. Both generals were executed. The defeat was catastrophic. Athens lost nearly its entire expeditionary force, its fleet, and its prestige. What began as an ambitious bid for empire ended in humiliation, proving that bold counter-strategy could destroy even the greatest power of the ancient world. The Battle of Stalingrad. In the summer of 1942, Hitler's armies swept deep into the Soviet Union, aiming to seize the oil fields of the Caucasus. Their path led through Stalingrad, a vital industrial city on the Volga River. From August 23, 1942, to February 2, 1943, this city became the stage for one of the deadliest battles in history. The Germans expected quick victory, but the Soviets transformed the ruins into a trap. Under General Vasily Chuikov, Soviet forces adopted defense in depth, drawing the enemy into brutal urban combat. Factories, apartments, and sewers became killing zones where tanks and artillery lost their advantage. German soldiers found themselves locked in a relentless street-by-street struggle, constantly ambushed by small Soviet units and snipers hidden in the rubble. Then, in November 1942, the Soviets struck back with Operation Uranus, a massive counter-offensive planned by Generals Georgy Zhukov and Alexander Vasilevsky. Instead of attacking the German center, they targeted the flanks, held by Romanian and Italian divisions. The blow was overwhelming. Within days, the German Sixth Army, more than 250,000 men under General Friedrich Paulus, was completely encircled. Cut off from supplies, starving, and freezing, the trapped soldiers held on through a brutal winter. Hitler ordered Paulus to fight to the last man, but the situation was hopeless. On February 2, 1943, Paulus surrendered. Nearly 91,000 German soldiers were taken prisoner, though only a fraction would survive captivity. The outcome was decisive. Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility and marked the first major defeat of Hitler's war machine. From that moment, the Red Army seized the momentum, driving westward until the final victory in Berlin. Vikings' invasion of Normandy. In the year 845 CE, the Vikings launched one of their most audacious raids into the heart of West Francia. At the head of 120 longships sailed a Norse chieftain named Reginharus, often linked in legend to Ragnar Lodbrok. His fleet carried thousands of warriors, not toward coastal targets, but up the Seine River itself, bypassing Frankish fortresses and striking deep inland. By late March, the Vikings reached the walls of Paris. It was Easter Sunday when they arrived, the perfect moment to catch the city off guard. King Charles the Bald hurried to assemble an army, splitting his forces to guard both banks of the Seine. But his strategy failed. The Vikings overwhelmed one division, captured 111 Frankish soldiers, and executed them on an island in the river. An offering to Odin meant to terrify their enemies. With little left to stop them, the Norsemen stormed Paris. They plundered churches, burned towns along the Seine, and spread panic throughout the Frankish realm. Confronted with the destruction of his capital, Charles had no choice but to negotiate. To secure the city's survival, he paid the invaders a massive ransom, 7,000 pounds of silver and gold. Only then did the Viking fleet withdraw, their coffers overflowing. The consequences were lasting. The siege of Paris revealed the weakness of Frankish defenses and the devastating power of Viking river warfare. In the years that followed, the Franks were forced to strengthen their rivers with fortified bridges and garrisons. The Incheon Landing, September 15, 1950. The Korean War had reached a desperate point. United Nations forces were trapped in a shrinking pocket around Pusan, their survival uncertain. It was then that General Douglas MacArthur proposed a daring move, an amphibious landing at Incheon, a port city more than 150 miles behind enemy lines. The risks were staggering. Incheon's harbor was notorious for its extreme tides, narrow approaches, and towering sea walls. Many of MacArthur's advisors warned it could be a disaster, but he argued that because it seemed impossible, the North Koreans would never expect it. His gamble was clear: strike deep in the enemy's rear, cut their supply lines, and break their advance. At dawn on September 15th, U.S. Marines stormed Wolmedo Island, the gateway to Incheon. By nightfall, they had seized the city's docks. Within days, UN forces pushed inland, capturing Kimpo Airfield and advancing rapidly towards Seoul. The sudden blow left the North Korean People's Army in chaos. Their lines collapsed, and tens of thousands were forced into retreat or captured. The impact was immediate and dramatic. What had seemed like the imminent fall of South Korea turned into a sweeping reversal. Within 2 weeks, Seoul was back in UN hands, and the momentum of the war had shifted. Though the conflict would continue for years, the Incheon Landing remains one of history's most brilliant examples of audacity, where a single bold strike reshaped the course of a war. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to be posting a lot more interesting videos on the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. Thank you very much.